trial to grow you. I know it sounds impossible, especially when as I'm preaching this, you're probably thinking of one particular trial, and I know you're thinking, I don't think so. But you've got to believe it. You've got to have faith in it at this point. And you're doing no good by running away from it. The best thing, the only thing you need to do is turn around and dig in and face it. Okay, so fighting is the next natural reaction. Don't be like the 10 virgins that Jesus talked about in the parable, when they were sitting around and some of them were ready. Remember the parable of 10 virgins where the bridegroom was going to finally say, I'm ready, and it's time for the party, it's time for the time to come together. And you remember how some of them had enough oil to trim their lamps and to be ready, and the rest of them had to run into town to get some more. Do you remember that? And Jesus said, don't be like those foolish people who weren't ready. You know the trial is coming. You need to be prepared for it. Well, the next thing is what comes after the compromise. I think what typically happens is once you begin to say, okay, I'll fight. We all love to start a fight. A lot of us don't finish fights. Okay? Look at verse 3. Here, James says, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Knowing is the word I want to focus on here. I think in times of trial, when we do dig in and start to fight, we typically, we kind of blink after a little bit. If we get one victory, one little victory, we tend to go, oh, great. It's like when you start an antibiotic and you start feeling better and you're like, I don't have to take the rest of that. And then you don't take the rest of the antibiotic and you get sick. And you get almost sicker than you were before, right? Well, in the same way, we start fights fairly well, but we don't always finish them well. We like to change horses midstream. But here, what James is saying is that he's saying you know better. There's only one way to gain endurance for a fight. Okay? That's why it says, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. There's no other way to get endurance than by the testing of your faith. I think we'd all like to think there's some other way, some shortcut to endurance. You ask anybody who's physically fit and strong, and they're not going to be able to say that they get there by any other way than trial. You talk at the best about in anything. If they're the best at any field, if they're the best craftsmen, if they're the best artisans, the best musicians, the best actors, the best authors, how did they get that way? They got that way by doing nothing but what they do. You go home this afternoon and watch the final few holes of the British Open. You watch those golfers. Those guys didn't roll out of bed playing like that. They hit millions of golf balls throughout their professional career. Okay? That's how they have the endurance for a test like that course. In the same way for you and for me, the only way that we gain endurance for the fight is by allowing our faith to be tested. That's why he says, you know it. I like that word. He doesn't even argue with him. It's like Thomas Jefferson talking about these truths being self-evident. He doesn't even try to argue for him. He says, you know that there's only one way to get that endurance, and it's by having your faith tested. So don't argue with me. You know better. Don't try to get around it by using any other means. It's not possible. Okay? So after the compromise, and that's going to happen to all of you, and when you start to fight, you're going to start saying, I think I've done enough now. And you start to make that compromise. That's when you have to have faith and trust. And that's where you have to follow the whole thing through. Take the whole antibiotic. Okay? Don't quit on what God's trying to accomplish. Let it take its full course. Fight it until it's finished. And so you can get the full benefit from it. Well, the final thing I want you to see from here is that what comes after the quiet. Look at verse 4. I love verse 4. Here James says, and let endurance have its perfect result, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Now, there's already been a bunch of unbelievable stuff in those first two verses of our passage. This probably takes the cake. How many of you think you can be lacking in nothing? Perfect and complete. I wouldn't ask for a raise of hands. I don't know if anybody raised a hand anyway. That is, that's a big one right there. That's a tall order. But what comes after, any trial, no trial lasts forever. Every night has its dawn. I don't care how dark the night is. Every night does have its dawn. And every trial is over at some point. And my question for you is, what comes after the quiet? When the trial is over. My charge to you then is to press on at that point. I think typically when the trial is over, we're like Noah. We get off the boat and we get drunk, right? Finally, this ordeal is over. Now I'm going to get loose and go crazy. That's typically just how we're built. But I charge you to do the exact opposite. When the trial is over, don't see that as license to cut loose, but rather to press on. Because what James says there is, once you have that endurance, once your faith has been tested, that's when you should he uses the word let, which is an interesting word to me, because what the word let says to me is that this endurance will naturally, if you just let it alone, this endurance will naturally produce perfection in your life and completion and fulfillment, and you'll be lacking in nothing. But when it says let, it means that you might short-circuit that. He's saying, if you allow these trials to play themselves out in the Lord, they're going to have a natural result for goodness in your life. The only thing that can keep these trials from being good in your life is you. The only thing you have to fear is yourself. So that's why he says, let it happen. Don't step in the middle of it and look to take that break. Because it's just evidence that you never really wanted it anyway. You were doing it out of duty and obligation. But let it have its perfect result. And then he uses the word may, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. The kingdom is here, and to constantly look ahead, and to deny Christ here today, I think is a chief sin in the Christian's life. I think so many Christians are caught and trapped looking ahead to the kingdom to come and reading the passage in Revelation that talks about the new heavens and the new earth, when there's a wonderful bounty of blessing that's here and accessible for us today. And so I think what comes after the quiet is intimacy. When your trial is over, don't use that opportunity then to enjoy what you had before, but rather take that opportunity to now enjoy what you have for the first time, which is that intimacy with the Lord. There's nothing better than finding fellowship with God in a difficult thing, right? When you're up against it and you're in a trial and you feel that fellowship with God, that's a wonderful thing. And I want you to all capitalize on that. Noah, when he got off that boat, he should have been thankful for the fresh air, but he should have enjoyed the fellowship he had with God now, instead of looking to get drunk and to cut loose. You get the idea. So my charge to you today is this. This is an easy passage to preach because we all have trials, and you all will have trials. My charge to you today is to quit allowing these trials to consume us and to ruin us and deplete our resources, and see if we can't put this passage to work, and see if it won't produce completion in our lives, perfection, that we might not be lacking in anything. Do you believe me? It doesn't matter if you believe me. Do you believe the Lord today? Do you believe this passage? Are you going to let it have this result? Will you allow it to do these things in your life? I pray so. I pray it for myself, and I pray it for you too. Let's pray together.